Respawn are really doing it. Not only are they adding fast travel to Jedi Survivor, we can also earn tons of new cosmetic options, including outfits that don't involve ponchos. We also got new combat gameplay thanks to IGN that looks very next level thanks to the new lightsaber stances, with especially the dual sabers looking really powerful. So let's go over a ton of new footage and info in this video. If you're looking forward to the game and enjoy the content here on the channel, then leave a like to help us out, subscribe for way more content like this, and let's go. Before we start, we're doing a giveaway for the digital deluxe edition of the game for a platform of your choice. You can find the link in the pinned comment. Remember that you have to be a subscriber of the channel to enter, and we'll reach out to the winner before launch. Good luck! So while the combat in Fallen Order was already pretty good, it's immediately clear that Survivor takes things to the next level. Previously, Cal had access to a single and dual bladed lightsaber, but in the sequel we can add dual sabers, a crossguard saber, and a saber blaster stance to the mix as well. Each of these stances has their own skill tree, so expect a pretty expansive moveset for each of them. Although there do seem to be some similarities between the different forms, as there are multiple variants of the saber throw available depending on your lightsaber configuration. I think the returning options need little explanation. Single bladed is still the jack of all trades, with powerful lunges dealing high guard damage, and the dual bladed saber is great against groups but has a longer wind up to its attacks. I did spot a new attack for that stance, by the way, as this attack where Cal leaps up and slams back down was not available in Fallen Order. We can also see in this clip here that the attack draws enemies in, which is of course perfect for a weapon where the main point is hitting as many targets as possible. So it's cool that they also added new moves to the familiar playstyles next to the completely new lightsaber configurations, although to be fair, these new weapons are even more exciting. The devs mentioned that the dual saber stance was the jumping off point for combat in Jedi Survivor. They had wanted to include it in the previous game but couldn't due to a lack of time, which is why we only ended up with that split saber attack in the end. But now the dual sabers have their own moveset and they reinforce a playstyle that is quite different from what we're used to. For starters, you're a bit more of a glass cannon as you take more damage, but you also attack faster and have access to some unique combos when delaying your input. So if you wait a bit before pressing the button for your next attack, you'll perform a unique move, which I think is what we see here. But what really sets the dual blades apart is that it's the only saber configuration that lets you cancel your attacks mid-move. While your other stances play more like a Souls-like, where you press the button and commit to a full animation, with the dual sabers you can change your plans mid-attack by either dodging or blocking to cancel your input. This and the delayed combos make it seem like a style that's much more reminiscent of an action game like Devil May Cry, although the fact that you take increased damage does of course mean that you need to play even more carefully than usual. And if a risk-reward playstyle is your thing, then the other new stance will be a great fit too. Because the Crossguard saber is described as having the most damage but also being the slowest. It's also the only stance that does not push you towards an enemy when attacking. So while attacks in other stances come with a bit of forward motion, with the Crossguard saber you need to mind your spacing and make sure that you can hit the enemy exactly from where you are standing. But mastering this stance will allow for some pretty massive damage, so it's definitely worth it to get some practice in. And while we did not get much details on it, the saber blaster stance also sounds really interesting. Now don't expect Jedi Survivor to turn into a third-person shooter all of a sudden, but we do get a nice ranged option as part of our moveset. The catch is that you need to regain ammo by hitting enemies in melee, so you are still encouraged to get up close and personal. Now one thing that was also mentioned that I found very interesting is that you aren't able to freely swap your saber stances on the fly. Instead, you can only have two different lightsaber configurations in your loadout, but you are able to freely swap these out at any meditation point. On a first impression, it kind of feels limiting having all these different playstyles available but only being able to access two at a time, but it does force you to think on what tools you might want to bring into a battle. And either way, returning to one of these meditation points should be a breeze now, because Respawn have made significant efforts to make navigating the worlds in Jedi Survivor much more enjoyable. Fast travel has been confirmed for the game, which is an especially welcome change considering the more open world design of some of the locations, like the planet Kobo we see here that will serve as Cal's home away from home. There's a town here called Rambler's Ranch that will serve as a sort of home base for you, so expect to come back here often. And while Kobo seems pretty large, there are markers for entrances to important locations, icons to let you know if an upgrade is required to progress, and a trail to mark which way you came from, all to keep you from getting lost. Which is of course also really useful if you're returning to a previously visited location with new abilities to access previously locked areas. And on the note of abilities, Cal has significant significantly expanded his options for moving around as well. We see his grappling hook in action here, which looks like it will function similarly to Horizon's Bullcaster in that it can only grapple onto specific objects. But we also have some form of air dash, which we saw in a previous trailer, so I expect platforming to be a lot more exciting in the sequel. And we're not limited by Cal's own abilities, as we can also use some of the local wildlife as a mount and even fight from their back, as well as use this pterodactyl-like creature as a glider. And the more open-ended locations will have many hidden areas for us to find, like the more puzzle-focused Jedi meditation chambers. With the exception of one, these are completely optional and they require you to use your force powers to make it through the chamber. And we can see that even the puzzle solving has received an upgrade, as you can now see the line running from the battery Cal is holding, indicating its trajectory when you will throw it. And while the main focus of these chambers is puzzle solving, you will need your traversal abilities and sometimes even combat to make it through all of them. But the more linear levels have secrets to discover as well. We also got some footage from Cal fighting on an unnamed moon, which IGN described as a more traditional level comparable to what we saw in Fallen Order. However, even this more linear mission had a secret combat challenge room, again very reminiscent of DMC, where you had to fight a huge group of battle droids. Even these weaker enemies can become a real menace in a group, so probably smart to pack your dual-bladed lightsaber for that fight. There's actually a lot more to talk about when it comes to enemy variety, so I will touch on that in a bit. Because I think that the new rewards for exploration are also a huge improvement over the previous title. Now, I don't think they got rid of the ponchos completely. We will probably find at least one of them in the game, but there are overall a lot more ways to customize our protagonist Cal in the sequel. We already see him finding a bomber jacket in a loot chest, and the pre-order and deluxe edition skins also offer very different looks. There is a short clip of gameplay from the Obi-Wan inspired outfit, which looks great. We can also unlock different hairstyles for Cal and are able to buy new cosmetics in Rambler's Ranch. Not sure if there are other planets that also have villages and stores for us to visit, but last game we had 0, so any place to score some nice new outfits, hairstyles and saber parts is great. But not all rewards are going to be cosmetic this time around, as at the end of the gameplay for the Jedi meditation chamber, we saw Cal loot a dexterity perk. From what we know, perks are mainly combat focused and need to be slotted in a perk system to enhance our fighting in one way or another. But we don't know how many perk slots we have, what exactly they do, and if they are only rewarded for completing these puzzle chambers. So while there's still some mystery there, I do think these will be pretty significant upgrades, considering stats are not really a thing, at least they weren't in the previous game. So this means that a perk either gives us access to a new ability or it enhances an existing ability or attack in a meaningful way. And maybe that leap attack that draws enemies in is an example of a perk, as we can see the attack in earlier gameplay and it doesn't have this effect, although that can of course also be a skill upgrade. And I'm assuming some of these perks will also affect our force powers. While we don't have a ton of info on it yet, Cal's force abilities seem to have had somewhat of an overhaul. There's a new power which lifts enemies up in the air and suspends them, allowing you to follow up with another force power like we see here. And while we have had access to a force slow since Fallen Order, it seems that the sequel is treating it a bit different. One big difference is that you don't just target a single enemy, but instead produce a massive slow field that affects every enemy in it. It also seems to work more like an ultimate ability, as it has a separate energy meter and is activated by pressing the left and right stick at the same time. So what I'm thinking now is that lift takes the place of slow, as it kind of has a similar role, which is to keep enemies in place. And then slow is a new type of ability I'm calling a force ultimate, and I'm assuming there are going to be multiple of these. Of course, with our lightsaber configurations now being swappable, the same could also be true for force powers, which could mean that we can use slow like we did in the previous game, but then we'd lose access to either force push, pull or lift. Either way, our moveset has been greatly expanded, but our enemies have also become much more dangerous. You've already seen the B1 and B2 battle droids in action, as well as the much scarier BX commando droids who have some dangerous close range combos. On top of that, droidicas have been confirmed, so the rolling droids with the deployable force shields, and we also got a bit of gameplay from Cal fighting a Magna Guard boss. But I think the most terrifying will be these DT sentry droids deployed by the Empire. These come in different variants, so there will be one with a hammer or one with a shield and a missile launcher, but the scariest thing about them is that they will come after you even if you dismember a limb. Which does mean we can probably cut off an arm and disable a key weapon, but these bulky boys will keep coming after you until you put them down for good. Now, on the note of dismemberment, I assumed at first that we'd be fighting more droids because this makes dismemberment possible without changing the H rating. But turns out I was was completely wrong, as we can see multiple examples of limbs being removed from stormtroopers as well. It mostly seems to happen when Cal is wielding a dual-bladed saber, but we can see a leg and later a hand with a blaster being cut off in gameplay, meaning dismemberment is also possible on humanoid targets. And in Jedi Survivor, that also includes the dangerous Bedlam Raiders, who we mostly see appear as these dangerous spear-wielding enemies. I think they're led by this big guy we saw in one of the trailers. We actually got some more info on him as well, and I have to say, he sounds absolutely terrifying. His name is Ravis, and he is part of a species known as the Gendai. They're very interesting for many reasons, with one of them being their physiology. I quote, "Their bodies are made up entirely of a giant mass of regenerative tentacles. Those impressive suits of armor you see aren't so much meant to protect the Gendai, but rather to keep them from spilling out." And a lightsaber is a great tool for many situations, but I don't know what chance we stand against a creature that is essentially a mass of regenerating tentacles. And considering how Fallen Order ended, we know Respawn knows how to make a character feel terrifyingly powerful if they need to, so I'm really curious to see Ravis's role in the story. Luckily, we might not need to take him down alone, as Respawn also put a lot of effort in their companions this time around. Some of them will be able to join you in combat, and the system is much more sophisticated than simply having someone around to tank the hits for you. For starters, you can command your allies to perform a special move. The example given was for new companion character Bode, who we saw interact with Cal briefly in a previous trailer. According to Respawn, he can use his jetpack to ram the enemy with a brutal dropkick and then quickly follow it up by slamming down a shock grenade to stun other nearby enemies if Cal tells him to do so. Sadly, there's no footage of this, but it sounds really useful. On top of that, Bode will also respond to your own actions to set up some combos. Again, no footage of this, but some of the examples given to IGN were that if you force push an enemy, Bode will fire a charged shot that deals a ton of damage, and the fact that you can force grab a probe droid, toss it at a group of stormtroopers, and then Bode's shot will essentially detonate the droid, causing a big explosion that takes out the group of enemies all at once. So again, it sounds like a really useful guy to have around, and I'm curious if we get to have a similar experience with some of the crew members of the Mantis. When we learn more about the game, we will of course let you know here, so subscribe to miss nothing and leave a like if you enjoyed the video. If you want, you can watch our previous one where we cover all details from the gameplay reveal trailer by clicking on the screen. I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.